Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? Another experimental episode in pre-recording today, being Tuesday, for our purposes, Tuesday, March 27th, 2018. Of course, once again, recording ahead of time. So, over the weekend, anything could have happened. Robert Mueller could have been fired, although I've just been approached by Arliss Bunny, it being really and truly Friday the 23rd, of course, with a plan for what to do with the show, should that prove to be the case. Some interesting ideas, and perhaps if it hasn't already come to pass, something we should plan for, and maybe you'll never hear this show, I don't know. But at any rate, here's the plan. I'm going to indulge our reading list about Cambridge Analytica and related information, and pick up then on pretty much where we left off on what we hope will be Monday's show, barring catastrophe or anything like it over the weekend. We left off at the end of Monday's show, midway through The Guardian's initial profile of Chris Wylie, the otherwise relatively liberal-leaning, it is reported anyway, liberal-leaning, what do we call him? Data scientist, computer whiz guy, who helped build the engine that became Cambridge Analytica, though he claims unwittingly, or at least not fully aware of where his bosses would eventually take it, though I think it's becoming obvious to us that there were some hints dropped about where it was going, and it has caused him some significant psychological pain in the meantime. We left off about the point in the story, this one again from Carol Cadwalader from The Guardian and Observer, profiling Chris Wylie, the young Canadian fellow behind all of this. Thanks for interfering in our politics. Why aren't we declaring war on them? Well, anyway, how ironic that everyone thinks that they should escape there. At any rate, we left off at the point of the story where he has now come into contact with and met Steve Bannon and become somehow fallen under his spell and become impressed with the man's supposed smarts. Recall that he measured these smarts by saying that he was the only straight man that he'd ever talked to about intersectional feminist theory, but that Bannon not only saw its relevance straight away, but that he saw it in relation to the oppressions that conservative young white men feel, which really has nothing to do with it, but I'm glad they had a good time talking about it. We read a little bit further at that point, at which point Wylie was explaining how, in his view, and I can see that there's some connection here, how it was that his initial interest in fashion trend forecasting translated itself into politics. It was, by his description, about how Bannon got it immediately. He believed the whole Andrew Breitbart doctrine that politics is downstream from culture, so to change politics, you need to change culture. And he explained it this way: fashion trends are a useful proxy for that. Trump is like a pair of Uggs or Crocs, basically. How do you get from people thinking Ugg totally ugly to the moment where everyone is wearing them? That was the inflection point he was looking for. But things were a little bit different from that. Wylie wasn't just talking about fashion. He had recently been exposed to a new discipline, information operations, which ranks alongside land, sea, air, and space in the U.S. military's doctrine of the five-dimensional battle space. His brief ranged across the SCL group, remember that, the parent company of what eventually became Cambridge Analytica, the SCL group. The British government has paid SCL to conduct counter-extremism operations in the Middle East, and the U.S. Department of Defense has contracted with it to work in Afghanistan. I, that being Carol Cadwalader, tell him that another former employee described the firm as MI6 for hire, and I'd never quite understood it. So Chris explains, it's like dirty MI6 because you're not constrained. Isn't that great? One of the wonderful benefits of outsourcing governmental functions to people who A, don't care, and B, are unconstrained, and we're all kept in the dark about that, so what a great combination. Plus money. It's like a dirty MI6 because you're not constrained. There's no having to go to a judge to apply for permission. It's normal for a market research company to amass data on domestic populations. And if you're working in some country and there's an auxiliary benefit to a current client with aligned interests, well, that's just a bonus. When I ask how Bannon even found SCL, Wiley tells me what sounds like a tall tale, though it's one he can back up with an email about how Mark Block, a veteran Republican strategist, happened to sit next to a cyber warfare expert for the U.S. Air Force on a plane. And the cyber warfare guy is like, oh, you should meet SCL. They do cyber warfare for elections. Oh, wonderful. It was Bannon who took this idea to the Mercers. Robert Mercer, the co-CEO of the hedge fund Renaissance Technologies, who used his billions to pursue a right-wing agenda, donating to Republican causes and supporting Republican candidates, and his daughter Rebecca. And you'll recall, I think, from backgrounders on Mercer that Renaissance Technologies was largely built on, well, if not cyber warfare for investing, then certainly data mining and data diving and manipulation and parsing for investment purposes. So he was a big believer in the data game. Nix and Wiley flew to New York to meet the Mercers in Rebecca's Manhattan apartment. She loved me. She was like, oh, we need more of your type on our side. The gay Canadian type. Oh, and she meant it. Your type? The gays. She loved the gays. So did Steve Bannon. He saw us as early adopters. Of what? I'm not sure. He figured, if you can get the gays on board, everyone else will follow. It's why he was so into the whole Milo Yiannopoulos thing. Is that real? All right. I mean, if he really thought that, fine. I don't know if he really did, but I guess surely they probably thought of him as some kind of yardstick. If you can convince gay people to get on board. And it wasn't clear that he was getting on board either. And it hasn't really worked, has it? Like, they have Milo Yiannopoulos. How many gay people have said, oh, Milo? Yeah, okay, I'll vote for Trump. I don't know. Robert Mercer, back to the story, was a pioneer in AI and machine translation. Here's the background we were looking for. He helped invent algorithmic trading. Great idea. Which replaced hedge fund managers with computer programs. And he listened to Wiley's pitch. When are we going to replace the rest of them with computer programs? They take too much money, although they tend to crash the markets too. Anyway, he listened to Wiley's pitch. It was for a new kind of political message targeting based on an influential and groundbreaking 2014 paper researched at Cambridge's Psychometrics Center called Computer-Based Personality Judgments Are More Accurate Than Those Made by Humans. In politics, the money man is usually the dumbest person in the room. Whereas it's the opposite way around with Mercer, says Wiley. He said very little, but he really listened. He wanted to understand the science, and he wanted proof that it worked. And to do that, Wiley needed data. How Cambridge Analytica acquired the data has been the subject of internal reviews at Cambridge University, of many news articles and much speculation and rumor. When Nix was interviewed by MPs last month, Damian Collins asked him, does any of your data come from Global Science Research Company? Nix answers, GSR? Collins, yes. Nix, we had a relationship with GSR. They did some research for us back in 2014. That research proved to be fruitless, and so the answer is no. Collins, they have not supplied you with data or information? Nix, no. Collins, your data sets are not based on information you have received from them? Nix, no. Collins, at all? Nix, at all. That's a lie. The problem with Nix's response to Collins is that Wiley has a copy of an executed contract dated for June 2014, which confirms that SCL, the parent company of Cambridge Analytica, entered into a commercial arrangement with a company called Global Science Research. Wow, GSR, owned by Cambridge-based academic Alexander Kogan, specifically premised on the harvesting and processing of Facebook data so that it could be matched to personality traits and voter roles. He has receipts showing that Cambridge Analytica spent $7 million to amass this data, about $1 million of it with GSR. He has the bank records and wire transfers. That would count as receipts. Emails reveal Wiley first negotiated with Michael Kosinski, one of the co-authors of the original My Personality research paper, to use the My Personality database. But when negotiations broke down, another psychologist, Alexander Kogan, offered a solution that many of his colleagues considered unethical. And it is, for a number of reasons, not the least of which is it's not your research, and you can't just reproduce it in order to elbow the original researchers out of a lucrative contract. All right. Well, at any rate, here's the unethical proposition. He offered to replicate Kaczynski and Stilwell's research and cut them out of the deal. It's cut them out of the deal part that's really problematic. I mean, trying to replicate research is, I guess, when you do it right, part of the peer review process. Can I produce the same results with the same, so that's the kind of replication, I guess, you do want to encourage. But the idea of, can I do what they did so that instead of you dealing with them and paying them for originating the idea, you can pay me as though I'd originated it. It's a totally different kind of replication. For Wiley, it seemed like a perfect solution because he's a kid and he doesn't know anything about intellectual property and et cetera, et cetera. Kaczynski was asking for $500,000 for the IP, but Kogan said he would replicate it and just harvest his own set of data. Kaczynski says the fee was to fund further research, which is kind of allegedly what those guys are about. Kogan then set up GSR to do the work and proposed to Wiley that they use the data to set up an interdisciplinary institute working across the social sciences. What happened to that idea? I asked Wiley. It never happened. I don't know why. That's one of the things that upsets me the most. It was Bannon's interest in culture as war, that ignited Wiley's intellectual concept. But it was Robert Mercer's millions that created a firestorm. Kogan was able to throw money at the hard problem of acquiring personal data. He advertised for people who were willing to be paid to take a personality quiz on Amazon's Mechanical Turk and Qualtrics, at the end of which Kogan's app called This Is My Digital Life, what did the original one was called? My Psychological Profile or something like that. Whatever happened to the naming of that one? I forget where we saw that one originally named, but interesting. So he likewise names it one long word all jammed together, no spaces. This is my digital life. He even copies that. Okay, so that's the app. And the app gave him permission to access their Facebook profiles. And not just theirs, but their friends too. On average, each seeder, the people who had taken the personality test, around 320,000 in total, unwittingly gave access to at least 160 other people's profiles, none of whom would have known or had reason to suspect. What the email correspondence between Cambridge Analytica employees and Kogan shows is that Kogan had collected millions of profiles in a matter of weeks, but neither Wiley nor anyone else at Cambridge Analytica had checked that it was legal. But why would you bother to check with that? You basically dropped out of school and then just became this guy. And though you have lots of computer experience, you never learned along the way that there might be something wrong about it, or that people can get themselves in trouble by not consulting with lawyers at almost every turn these days. It certainly wasn't authorized anyway. Kogan did not have permission to pull Facebook data, but for he did have permission, but for academic purposes only. But because he was working at Cambridge, he just thought everything was academic, even if it wasn't. What's more, under British data protection laws, it's illegal for personal data to be sold to a third party without consent. Whoops. But why would I bother to check that? I'm not a lawyer, and neither is my partner. Didn't you just say you went and studied law at the London School of Economics? Huh. Was it before or after where we are in this story? Facebook could see what was happening, by the way, Wiley says. Their security protocols were triggered because Kogan's apps were pulling this enormous amount of data, but apparently Kogan told them it was for academic use, so they were like, fine. Kogan maintains that everything he did was legal, and he had a close working relationship with Facebook, which had granted him permission for his apps. Cambridge Analytica had its data. This was the foundation of everything it did next. How it extracted psychological insights from the seeders and then built an algorithm to profile millions more. For more than a year, the reporting around what Cambridge Analytica did or didn't do for Trump has revolved around the question of psychographics. But Wiley points out everything was built on the back of that data. The models, the algorithm, everything. Why wouldn't you use it in your biggest campaign ever? In December of 2015, The Guardian's Harry Davies published the first report about Cambridge Analytica acquiring Facebook data and using it to support Ted Cruz in his campaign to be the U.S. Republican candidate. But it wasn't until many months later that Facebook took action. And then all they did was write a letter. In August of 2016, shortly before the U.S. election and 2 years after the breach took place, Facebook's lawyers wrote to Wiley, who left Cambridge Analytica in 2014, and told him the data had been illicitly obtained and that GSR was not authorized to share or sell it. They said it must be deleted immediately. I already had, but literally all I had to do was tick a box and sign it and send it back, and that was it, said Wiley. Facebook made zero effort to get the data back. There were multiple copies of it. It had been emailed in unencrypted files. Okay. Cambridge Analytica rejected all allegations the Observer put to them. Dr. Kogan, who later changed his name to Dr. Spector, but has subsequently changed it back to Dr. Kogan, is still a faculty member at Cambridge University. How interesting. A senior research associate. But what his fellow academics didn't know until Kogan revealed it in emails to the Observer, although Cambridge University says that Kogan told the head of the psychology department, is that he is also an associate professor at the St. Petersburg University. Further research revealed that he's received grants from the Russian government to research stress, health, and psychological well-being in social networks. The opportunity came about on a trip to the city to visit friends and family, he said. There are other dramatic documents in Wiley's stash, including a pitch made by Cambridge Analytica to Lukoil, Russia's second biggest oil producer. In an email dated 17 July 2014 about the U.S. presidential primaries, Nix wrote to Wiley, "We have been asked to write a memo to Lukoil, the Russian oil and gas company, to explain to them how our services are going to apply to the petroleum business." Nix said that, quote, they understand behavioral micro-targeting in the context of elections, but that they were failing to make the connection between voters and their consumers. The work, he said, would be shared with the CEO of the business, a former Soviet oil minister and associate of Putin, Vagit Alekperov. Alekperov? I don't know. You tell me. It didn't make any sense to me, said Wiley. And remember, this is the guy who thought, oh yeah, fashion, trends, and politics. I can totally see that parallel. This one doesn't make any sense to him. I didn't understand either the email or the pitch presentation we did. Why would a Russian oil company want to target information on American voters? I don't know. Or perhaps more appropriately, yes, I think I'll go with that one on that. Mueller's investigation traces the first stages of the Russian operation to disrupt the 2016 U.S. election back to 2014, right about this time, when the Russian state made what appears to be its first concerted efforts to harness the power of America's social media platforms, including Facebook. And it was in late summer of the same year that Cambridge Analytica presented the Russian oil company with an outline of its data sets, capabilities, and methodology. The presentation had little to do with consumers. Instead, documents show it focused on election disruption techniques. The first slide illustrates how a rumor campaign spread fear in the 2007 Nigerian election in which the company worked by spreading the idea that the election would be rigged, and that's in quotes. The final slide, branded with Lukoil's logo and that of the SCL Group and SCL Elections, headlines its deliverables, psychographic messaging. How interesting. Lukoil is a private company, but its CEO, Alek Perov, answers to Putin, as I'm sure most CEOs do in that country, and it's been used as a vehicle of Russian influence in Europe and elsewhere, including in the Czech Republic, where in 2016 it was revealed that an advisor to the strongly pro-Russian Czech president was being paid by the company. By the way, how does the American CIA usually ask covert operatives to conduct their business when abroad, either inside a target country or anywhere abroad, usually, of course, under cover of some sort of private employment, one that would give them perhaps plausible reason, even though this one wasn't particularly plausible, to have an interest in information that might perhaps be considered dual use at best, and unbeknownst to the people in the in country here, the real interest is in the military, perhaps the military use of this otherwise civilian technology that this so-called CEO is so interested in. I'm just pointing that out. It's not like it's unknown as tradecraft. When I asked Bill Browder, you remember his name, the Anglo-American businessman who is leading a global campaign for a Magnitsky Act to enforce sanctions against Russian individuals, what he made of this, he said, everyone in Russia is subordinate to Putin. One should be highly suspicious of any Russian company pitching anything outside its normal business activities. I would add maybe even the normal ones. Last month, Nix told MPs on the parliamentary committee investigating fake news, we have never worked with a Russian organization in Russia or any other company. We do not have any relationship with Russia or Russian individuals. And boy, does that sound like what Donald Trump had to say about himself. There's no evidence that Cambridge Analytica ever did any work for Lukoil. What these documents show, though, is that in 2014, one of Russia's biggest companies was fully briefed on Facebook, micro-targeting, data, and election disruption. And it was all done, of course, I would add, by SCL, which is, as we learned earlier, Cambridge Analytica, under a different name. Cambridge Analytica is Chris's Frankenstein, a friend of his says. He created it. It's his data Frankenmonster. And now he's trying to put it right. Of course, actually, Frankenstein was the name of the... Okay. Everybody knows that one. Oh, and by the way, Frankenstein. No, Frankenstein. Yeah. Gives me another excuse to play this. Only once has Wiley made the case of pointing out that he was 24 at the time. But he was. And perhaps we'll hear a little bit more about that later. I know I have another piece to share with you about this guy. He thrilled to the intellectual possibilities of it. He didn't think of the consequences. That's what college is for, but okay. And I wonder how much he's processed on his own role or responsibility in it. Instead, he's determined to go on the record and undo this thing he has created. Because the past few months have been like watching a tornado gathering force, and when Wiley turns the full force of his attention to something, his strategic brain, his attention to detail, his ability to plan 12 moves ahead, maybe not. It is sometimes slightly terrifying to behold. Dealing with someone trained in information warfare has its own particular challenges, and his suite of extraordinary talents include the kind of high-level political skills that makes House of Cards look like the Great British Bake Off. And not everyone's a fan. Any number of ex-colleagues, even the ones who love him, call him Machiavellian. Another described the screaming matches he and Nix would have. What do your parents make of your decision to come forward? I ask him. They get it. My dad sent me a cartoon today, which had two characters hanging off a cliff. The first one saying, hang in there, and the other is like, F you. Which are you? She asks. Probably both. What isn't in doubt is what a long, fraught journey it has been to this stage and how fearless he is. After many months, I learn the terrible, dark backstory that throws some light on his determination, and which he discusses candidly. Let's see. Maybe it'll help us. At 6, while at school, Wiley was abused by a mentally unstable person. The school tried to cover it up, blaming his parents, and a long court battle followed. Wiley's childhood and school career never recovered. His parents, and that explains dropping out of school anyway, his parents, his father is a doctor and his mother is a psychiatrist, were wonderful, he says. But they knew the trajectory of people who are put in that situation, so I think it was particularly difficult for them because they had a deeper understanding of what that does to a person long term. He says he grew up listening to psychologists discuss him in the third person. And at age 14, he successfully sued the British Columbia Ministry of Education and forced it to change its inclusion policies around bullying. What I observe now is how much he loves the law, lawyers, precision, order. I come to think of his pink hair as a false flag operation. Oh, that's an interesting term to throw in there. Where were we? There's a false flag operation. Yes. What he cannot tolerate is bullying. Is what Cambridge Analytica does akin to bullying? I think it's worse than bullying, Wiley says, because people don't necessarily know it's being done to them. At least bullying respects the agency of people because they know. So it's worse because if you do not respect the agency of people, anything that you're doing after that point is not conducive to a democracy. And fundamentally, information warfare is not conducive to democracy. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring, monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Time for us to, I think, conclude this piece in The Guardian. Thanks to Carol Cadwalder for providing it and for taking the time to interview Chris Wiley. A tricky figure, to be sure. Yes, fundamentally, information warfare is not conducive to democracy. That's probably true. Not really conducive to much of anything, actually, that requires rational decision-making by independent actors. And, if you just give them the wrong information, you're going to get the wrong results. Continuing on, then, Russia, Facebook, Trump, Mercer, Bannon, Brexit. Every one of these threads runs through Cambridge Analytica, which is why we're here spending so much time on it. Even in the past few weeks, it seems as if the understanding of Facebook's role has broadened and deepened. The Mueller indictments were part of that, but Paul Olivier Dehaye, I'm hoping I haven't mangled his last name, Dehaye, D-A-H-A-Y-E, a data expert and academic based in Switzerland. He'll never hear me over the mountains, so I'll never figure out whether I got his name right or not, who published some of the first research into Cambridge Analytica's processes. Says it's become increasingly apparent that Facebook is abusive by design. Very true, and I know I have a piece in Pocket somewhere about that. If there is evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia, it will be in the platform's data flows, he says. That's above my head. And Wiley's revelations only move it on again. Facebook has denied and denied and denied this, Dehaye says. When told of the Observer's new evidence, it has misled MPs and congressional investigators, and it's failed in its duties to respect the law. It has a legal obligation to inform regulators and individuals about this data breach, and it hasn't. It's failed time and time again to be open and transparent. We're just looking at pictures of hot chicks, man. Facebook denies that the data transfer was a breach. In addition, A spokesperson said, "Protecting people's information is at the heart of everything we do, and we require the same from people who operate apps on Facebook." If these reports are true, it's a serious abuse of our rules. Both Alexander Kogan, as well as the SCL Group and Cambridge Analytica, certified to us that they destroyed the data in question. Duh. Millions of people's personal information was stolen and used to target them in ways they wouldn't have seen and couldn't have known about by a mercenary outfit, Cambridge Analytica, who, Wiley says, would work for anyone. Nah, that's not true. They'll only work for Republicans and ultra-reactionary conservatives. Let's be honest about that. Who would pitch to Russian oil companies? Who would pitch? Oh, okay. I don't know whether that's not a question. You're saying they would work for anyone. Who would pitch to Russian oil companies? Would they subvert elections abroad on behalf of foreign governments? It occurs to me to ask Wiley this one night. Yes. NATO or non-NATO? Either. I mean, they're mercenaries. They'll work for pretty much anyone who pays. Again, I think a misunderstanding. NATO or non-NATO? Non-NATO Russia? Sure. NATO America? Yes, but only insofar as they were in alignment with the alt-right wackos who, for some reason, have strangely found themselves in alliance/collusion with Russia. So yeah, they'll work with NATO nations, but would they really work with pro-Democratic Party types, liberal types for real, or people who are trying to kick out or root out Russian influence? Open question. They say so. Can't prove them wrong, but it's out there that they haven't worked with anybody like that. Of course, there hasn't been anybody who knew that had to be a public mission yet, so I don't know that they've had the opportunity to do so, and they may never have done it even if they had. So, okay. It's an incredible revelation, she writes. It also encapsulates all of the problems of outsourcing at a global scale, with added cyber weapons. And in the middle of it all are the public, our intimate family connections, our likes, our crumbs of personal data, all sucked into a swirling black hole that's expanding and growing and is now owned by a politically motivated billionaire. The Facebook data is out in the wild, and for all Wiley's efforts, there's no turning the clock back. Tamsin Shaw, a philosophy professor at the New York University, and the author of a recent New York Review of Books article on cyber war and the Silicon Valley economy, told me that she'd pointed to the possibility of private contractors obtaining cyber weapons that had at least been in part funded by U.S. defense. She calls Wiley's disclosures wild and points out that the whole Facebook project has only been allowed to become as vast and powerful as it has because of the U.S. national security establishment. It's a form of very deep but soft power that's been seen as an asset for the U.S. Russia has been so explicit about this, paying for the ads in rubles and so on. It's making this point, isn't it, that Silicon Valley is a U.S. national security asset that they've turned on itself. Or, more simply, blowback. Wow. Well, that's finally the conclusion of this piece. Where to go from there? Well, let's see. There's a number of different directions, of course. There's the Intercept version of things here. Let me just quickly reload our pocket here so we can get all of the pictures that help us determine which piece we're on here. But I know that this piece made me think of at least two different places we should probably go to. First of all, The Intercept is the next one in my pocket, but that's the one from years ago, and it might be interesting to just sort of peek back in on how that 1 year ago, how that presented the issue back in March 30th of 2017. Maybe we can get a flavor of this piece, but this wasn't what was sparked in my mind by finishing up the last piece. The things that came to mind. I should probably make a note to self on these things. One was, there we are, on weaponized design. We'll check that mark there and see that we get back to that one. And the other one was, as I said, there's sort of a counter narrative out there on Chris Wiley. And it might take me some time to identify that piece now. There we are. BuzzFeed, I think, had that story. BuzzFeed on Wiley. Also well worth taking a look at. Okay, just note to self here. But now I'm curious about jumping into the Intercept's entry back from 2017. And then maybe we'll just, like I said, take a dip into the waters here and see what it's like. In 2014, and we know that that's now established by the Guardian's reporting, traces of an unusual survey connected to Facebook, sound familiar, began appearing on internet message boards. The boards were frequented by remote freelance workers who bid on human intelligence tasks in an online marketplace called Mechanical Turk, controlled by Amazon. The Turkers, as they're known, tend to perform work that is rote and repetitive, like flagging pornographic images or digging through search engine results for email addresses. Most jobs pay between 1 and 15 cents. Turking makes us our rent money and helps us pay off debt, one Turker told The Intercept. Another Turker called the work voluntary slave labor. This does sound familiar, and I'm pretty sure we probably read it when it came out, which is why perhaps we were less than surprised when the rest of the Cambridge Analytica story came out, even if we didn't recognize the 30 million user figure that was thrown out there. This, by the way, written by Matthias Schwartz back in March of 2017. The task, posted by Global Science Research, appeared ordinary, at least on the surface. The company offered Turkers $1 or $2 to complete an online survey. But there were a couple of additional requirements as well. First, Global Science Research was only interested in American Turkers. Second, the Turkers had to download a Facebook app before they could collect payment. Global Science Research said the app would download some information about you and your network, basic demographics and likes of categories, places, famous people, etc., from you and your friends. So it's out there. Not for the friends, but it's out there for them. Our terms of service clearly prohibit misuse, said a spokesperson. Oh, this is Amazon Web Services by email. When we learned of this activity back in 2015, we suspended the requester for violating our terms of service. Although Facebook's early growth was driven by closed exclusive networks at colleges and universities, it has gradually herded users to agree to increasingly permissive terms of service. By 2014, anything a user's friends could see was also potentially visible to the developers of any app that they chose to download. Some of the Turkers noticed that the Global Science Research app appeared to be taking advantage of Facebook's porousness. Someone can learn everything about you by looking at hundreds of pics, messages, friends, and likes, warned one, writing on a message board. More than you realize. Others were more blasé. I don't put any info on FB, one wrote. Not even my real name. It's backwards that people put so much info on Facebook and then complain when their privacy is violated. Yeah, although a lot of people just don't know enough about it, like you guys do. In late 2015, this whole article is starting to sound more and more familiar, but maybe it's just because it's covering the same ground. The Turkers began reporting that Global Science Research Survey had abruptly shut down. The Guardian had published a report that exposed exactly who the Turkers were working for. Their data was being collected by Alexander Kogan, a young lecturer at Cambridge University. Kogan founded Global Science Research in 2014 after the university's psychology department refused to allow him to use its own pool of data for commercial purposes. The data collection that Kogan undertook independent of the university was done on behalf of a military contractor called Strategic Communication Laboratories, or SCL. The company's election division claims to use data-driven messaging as part of delivering electoral success. SCL has a growing U.S. spin-off called, you know what it is, Cambridge Analytica, which was paid millions of dollars by Donald Trump's campaign. Much of the money came from committees funded by the hedge fund billionaire Robert Mercer, who reportedly has a large stake in Cambridge Analytica. For a time, one of Cambridge Analytica's officers was Stephen K. Bannon, Trump's senior advisor. Months after Bannon claimed to have severed his ties with the company, like with Breitbart, but which he didn't, checks from the Trump campaign for Cambridge Analytica's services continued to show up at one of Bannon's addresses in Los Angeles. Uh-oh. You can say Mr. Mercer declined to comment, says Jonathan Gasthalter, a spokesperson for Robert Mercer, by email. The Intercept interviewed 5 individuals familiar with Kogan's work for SCL. All declined to be identified, citing concerns about an ongoing inquiry at Cambridge and fears of possible litigation. 2 sources familiar with SCL's project told The Intercept that Kogan had arranged for more than 100,000 people to complete the Facebook survey and download an app. A third source with direct knowledge of the project said that Global Science Research obtained data from 185,000 survey participants as well as their Facebook friends. The source the source said that this group of 185,000 was recruited through a data company, not Mechanical Turk, and that it yielded 30 million usable profiles. No one in this larger group of 30 million knew that likes and demographic data from their Facebook profiles were being harvested by political operatives hired to influence American voters. Not that unfamiliar now, and not that different from what was reported, except it was reported a year ago. So very interesting that that's out there and that we just somehow did not register it. And sometimes it just takes repetition more over and over to see this stuff and to get it to sink in, even if you saw it the first time. Very interesting. And as I'm skimming down the all the way to the end there, I mean, for one thing, lots of emphasis on global science research and SCL, though Cambridge Analytica gets a prominent mention. But was it the case that in March of 2017 we didn't know what we were looking at when it came to Cambridge Analytica? I can't really remember when it was that we discovered what this thing was about. Okay, so let's see. Also have some other things that I wanted to add to the threads about Cambridge Analytica and others. Let's see, of course, there's the Channel 4 films about them. And there's some other interesting stuff here, like the Guardian's opinion piece here, which I thought was of interest, from Ellie Mae O'Hagan, who I would guess is maybe Irish. No one can pretend Facebook is just harmless fun anymore. Refocusing on Facebook's role in all this. From its stance on extremist content to its vast caches of user data, Facebook is a corporation whose power must, finally, be reined in. Largely true, illustrated both by photos of Mark Zuckerberg jogging through Berlin and Chris Wiley from his profile in The Guardian. The revelation, she begins, that Cambridge Analytica exploited the data of 50 million Facebook profiles to target American voters is indeed frightening. But Cambridge Analytica shouldn't act as a diversion from the real bad guy in this story, Facebook. It is mystifying that as his company regulates the flow of information to billions of human beings, encouraging certain purchasing habits and opinions, and monitoring people's interactions, Mark Zuckerberg is invited to give lectures at Harvard without being treated with due skepticism. We have now reached the point where an unaccountable private corporation is holding detailed data on over a quarter of the world's population. Zuckerberg and his company have been avoiding responsibility for some time. Governments everywhere need to get serious in how they deal with Facebook. After trolls were sent to jail for sending threatening messages to the activist Caroline Criado Perez and MP Stella Creasy, a debate ensued over whether the likes of Facebook and Twitter should be classified as platforms or publishers. Facebook is treated as if it is simply a conduit for information, meaning it is not liable for the content its users share, in the same way that BT, British Telecom, can't be sued when people make threatening phone calls. In 2014, Ian McKenzie, a spokesman spokesman for Facebook, said every piece of content on Facebook has an associated report option that escalates it to your user operations team for review. Additionally, individuals can block anyone who is harassing them, ensuring they will be unable to interact further. Facebook tackles malicious behavior through a combination of social mechanisms and technological solutions appropriate for a mass-scale online opportunity. That's what they like you to think. But the company is evasive about the number of moderators it employs, how they work, and how decisions are made. It has started taking a firmer line on far-right content, recently removing Britain First pages from the site, but it is still resisting many legislative attempts to regulate its content. What content users then see is decided by an algorithm that can change without any consultation, including with the government or businesses that rely on Facebook for revenue, meaning that some can be quickly wiped off the map. In February of 2018, the website Digiday reported on Little Things, a 4-year-old site that shut down overnight after Facebook decided to prioritize user posts over publisher content. 100 jobs were lost. Facebook wasn't the only contributor to Little Things' demise, but those working at the website said there was nowhere else to go after the algorithm change. And this isn't the only example. In 2013, an algorithm change halved the traffic of viral content website Upworthy, something from which the website has never recovered. The impact of Facebook's dominance means that publications are constantly scrambling to keep up with the platform's changing strategy. Editor-in-chief of Wired, Nick Thompson, recently told the Digiday podcast that there was a fear Facebook has a dial somewhere that can be turned to cut off media that gets too uppity. Much has been made of the fact that Facebook creates filter bubbles. It has been criticized for prioritizing content that users will like, meaning there is less diversity in the news stories people read, and for failing to crack down on propaganda. In fact, Italy's new far-right star Matteo Salvini explicitly thanked Facebook. Thank you, WikiLeaks. We love WikiLeaks. Thank you, Facebook. I don't know how he did it. It's terrible. Should not be doing that. Anyway, he thanked Facebook for contributing to the country's recent election results. All this from a company that in 2016 paid just £5.1 million in corporation tax on its UK operations, despite profit and revenues nearly quadrupling on the back of increased advertising sales. In December of 2017, Facebook announced it would start booking advertising revenue in countries where it was earned instead of rerouting it through Ireland. Although, as this newspaper reported, the move is unlikely to result in it paying much more tax. This is despite Zuckerberg calling for governments to start paying a universal basic income for every citizen as a response to automation, driven in part by Silicon Valley. Even if we want to avoid the site and keep our data protected, it's not as easy as one might think. According to Roger McNamee, an early investor in Facebook, the company uses techniques found in propaganda and casino gambling to foster psychological addiction in its users, such as constant notifications and variable rewards. By keeping us hooked, Facebook is able to hold a huge amount of data on us. What is surprising and worrying is that the derived data Facebook has, the profiles it can build on users based on seemingly innocuous information. The author of the book Networks of Control, Wolfie Crystal, noted that a patent published by Facebook works out people's commute times by using location data from mobile apps. It then uses this and other data to segregate users into social classes. Facebook's massive data cache goes hand in hand with its acquisition of competitors. Nick Surincek, let's guess what are these names? Srnicek. Nick Surincek, author of Platform Capitalism, says Facebook is acting like a classic monopoly. It's buying up competitors like Instagram. It's blatantly copying rivals like Snapchat. And it even has its own app, Onavo, I don't ever heard of that one, that acts to warn them of potential threats. All of this is combined with an unchecked sweeping up of our data that's being used to build an impervious moat around its business. If ExxonMobil attempted to insert itself into every element of our lives like this, there might be a concerted grassroots movement to curb its influence. So perhaps it's time to start treating Facebook as the giant multinational corporation it is, especially because people with Facebook profiles aren't the company's customers. They are the product it sells to advertisers. Good point. Well taken, and I think helpful in our overall view of the picture. All right, so I have got this other piece here that I wanted to share with you, but on further review, I find that the piece is very jargon heavy and dense, but it makes excellent points, and it's footnoted. So I want to bring your attention to it, and I guess I'll assign it to you to read offline, and you don't have to. But I think it's very helpful in coming to understand how it is that, if you consider them to be brilliant people, the brilliant people who put together Facebook and any number of these other social media platforms still end up being so blind to the harm their product can end up causing. It's a piece called On Weaponized Design, and it is on the blog, I assume, of ourdataourselves.tacticaltech.org. And so I'm not entirely sure whether the blog name is Our Data Ourselves or that's the section of Tactical Tech that it's on, but it's very interesting. I'll provide the link to you, and you can take a look at it yourself. I did try reading through it, and it needs to be read slowly and parsed, and it'll take us forever to do it. And the main point, though, of the thing is explaining kind of how it is that software engineers who have brilliant ideas about how they can do great stuff for their users sometimes end up doing the very opposite, sometimes the very opposite of the thing they were looking to prevent, or just some other unforeseen circumstance. And then, if I understand the piece correctly, how online user interface conventions dictate that the next generation of these platforms or apps or what have you continue to make these sorts of mistakes, and how there is a financial penalty sometimes imposed by investors who fund these things and who drive the development of these things that gets in the way of correcting those mistakes, even if you wanted to. It's a very insightful piece, I thought, and very well footnoted. Like I said, I think the best way to read it is to read through some of the things that the author points out have gone wrong in history online, essentially, on these online platforms. And they make references to stories that you may or may not sometimes have heard of before. And if you haven't heard of them, it makes you very curious. If you have heard of them and you're reading the story out loud, let's say on a podcast or a radio show, it makes you want to stop and read each footnote and say, do you understand what this was the example that they were talking about, and this is exactly how that went down, and do you remember that story? I definitely recommend it to you. And though I find it too dense for radio. I do have two other pieces, I think, at the ready that will tell us more about Cambridge Analytica, including the one piece that I semi-promised to you, so maybe we'll hold it for after the upcoming break and bring it to you, that there was some counter spin available, a counter narrative available. Was this one from BuzzFeed? Yeah, on Chris Wiley, the whistleblower, founder / programmer / I don't know what, creative genius behind the what became Cambridge Analytica, who left the company early on and has since turned over a new leaf, maybe? Well, we don't really know. Ryan Mack reported this for BuzzFeed, and I'll tease it for you, and then we'll take a short break and be back after that. But before I get to those things, though, or that one story, there are two other bizarro stories that are sort of floating out there, and I don't know if we're going to get a chance to get through them in their totality, but I wanted to at least enter them onto the record. One from Politico that was detailing the story of a fake news story from several years ago that was actually launched during the campaign of the Broward County, Florida sheriff, who faced, I guess, a particularly sharp-elbowed opponent who launched a fake news story where they paid a woman to accuse him of sexual assault and of fathering a child with her and forcing her to have an abortion. And this story broke about the same time as another fake news-ish story, which was from down in the Alabama Senate race, where an attorney who says Roy Moore's supporters offered him $10,000 to drop his client, who was one of the accusers of Roy Moore, and instead say that he didn't believe her, and they had a whole thing set up where they were going to release a press release and a statement from this attorney once he agreed to do this through Breitbart News. Amazing that news organization Breitbart was willing to go through with this thing. I mean, amazingly revealing. If we don't get to that, I will drop those references for you. And they both broke on the same day. Gee whiz, both sides, right? Oh boy, unbelievable. Anyway, BuzzFeed News. The BuzzFeed News piece on Wiley starts off this way. I want to build the NSA's wet dream. It was not really my choice of their headlines. Of course, it's a morning show, but hey, I'm recording it for you in the evening, so it's okay. The Cambridge Analytica whistleblower said he wanted to create the NSA's wet dream. Why would he want to do that? I don't really know rightly, but it gives you the sense that he may not necessarily be the person that he says he is now, or that he grew up a great deal in between the time he said things like that and now. And we'll check that out later. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And if I've got the timing right on everything, which I am sure I now don't, we will just have exited our 1 minute break. Of course, I went into it thinking it was one of those 2-minute breaks, and, well, you know how that goes. All right, well, I've got here the BuzzFeed News piece. Let's run through it. The Cambridge Analytica whistleblower, Chris Wiley, the whistleblower who helped found Cambridge Analytica, recently came clean about his role in creating the controversial data mining outfit. BuzzFeed News has obtained communications that show what he was thinking when he went about founding what would become Cambridge Analytica and, quote, why being evil pays more. Ryan Mack for BuzzFeed News on this one. A few months before Christopher Wiley helped build Cambridge Analytica and 5 years before he helped bring it down, the data scientist had already settled on an ambition. I want to build the NSA's wet dream, he told an acquaintance, and boy, I hope it was a close acquaintance. That was October 2013, and Wiley, in his early 20s, was gathering massive amounts of personal data as research director for SCL Group, a contractor that did military and political campaign work. You know who they are, of course. He was also trying to raise money for his new startup concept, then called Arg.us. Argus? That would ingest users' social media activity and use it to build psychographic profiles that marketers could use to identify our personalities and possibly influence our behavior. Wiley now is a central figure in one of the biggest stories in the world, though nobody can quite figure out what the story is. Is Cambridge Analytica a sinister conspiracy or a high-flying fraud? We have some articles that suggest that on tap, too. Are the victims the political campaigns they worked for, or the citizens they targeted with ads? And is Wiley himself an altruist whistleblower or a co-conspirator, or rather it just says conspirator, but who got cold feet? An investigation by BuzzFeed News suggests some answers to those questions. For one thing, the scale and ambition of Wiley and his future colleagues' data gathering was no facade. Wiley was planning to build a company that could take what millions of people share online every day, such as likes or status updates on Facebook, and turn it into actionable data that could be sold to whoever was willing to pay. It also reveals that before Wiley blew the whistle, he was well aware how behavioral micro-targeting could be applied to business and politics and how it might be abused. So that's a step ahead of where we thought he was, if he was at least well aware of it. I mean, that doesn't help us think of him as a good guy, but I getcha. According to documents obtained by BuzzFeed News and interviews with people who knew Wiley, the young data scientist was enthralled by the idea of a tool that, years later, would be used to create detailed psychological profiles of the U.S. electorate ahead of the 2016 presidential election. These documents, provided by 3 sources who verified their identities and connections to Wiley, but declined to be named, include presentation slides, online correspondence, employment contracts, and work prospectuses. But while the documents do not always cast Wiley, touted by some as the millennials' first great whistleblower, in a flattering light, they also do not call his claim into question. In fact, they bolster the substance of the reporting by the New York Times and the Observer about Cambridge Analytica and add credibility to the allegations Wiley has made to the press since last Friday. And if the documents reveal the Canadian citizen as a complicated figure, that places him in a long line of complicated and complex whistleblowers. Wiley responded to questions through his lawyer, Tamsin Allen, who noted that her client has made several flippant and stupid comments in text messages and instant messages, which he regrets. Well, haven't we all? He is coming forward to give public attention to serious issues, including the ethics and wrongdoing of Cambridge Analytica. Allen said in an email to BuzzFeed News he fully accepts his share of responsibility in setting up CA and has proactively worked with both UK authorities and the media to give attention to the issue. In October 2013, 5 years before he came clean on Cambridge Analytica, the voter profiling company he helped create, Wiley was pitching what may have been its sister company. At the time, Wiley was employed by SCL Group, where he oversaw the gathering and analysis of large bundles of personal data. While Wiley was young, he had already volunteered for Barack Obama's 2008 presidential campaign and worked on Canadian elections, allowing him to see the foundation for something far more significant. In one exchange from the documents obtained by BuzzFeed News, Wiley noted that it was relatively easy to determine someone's psychological disposition simply by analyzing a few weeks of their internet browsing. Add their social media activity to the mix, he theorized, and you could probably anticipate how someone might behave in various scenarios. You could combine all their data exhaust to create a supermodel of behavior and apply hyper-targeting compliance-gaining techniques to make people buy stuff, he explained to a source. Getting a little jargony here, too. In the press, Wiley has expressed remorse over his role in developing what he called Steve Bannon's psychological warfare tool. But his early correspondence suggests he was acutely aware of how the data collection techniques that he was developing might be used. Our goal is, first, to make it an extremely profitable company, Wiley wrote in late 2013 about his new startup. Then, we will cleanse our souls with other projects, like using the data for good rather than evil. But evil pays more. That is rather flippant. Also true. In late 2013, Wiley, a Canadian data scientist who was then finishing his PhD in fashion forecasting at the London College of Fashion, that's where you would do such a thing, I guess, was mulling over his next move after SCL, a government and elections contractor, we know this already, come on, where he was working as a research director. There were things he didn't enjoy about the job, including his boss, eventual Cambridge Analytica CEO Alexander Nix, and his lack of equity in the company. But he was worried about losing his visa if he left SCL without a backup plan, so while he continued his day job, Wiley dreamed up a startup of his own, telling friends he wanted to create the NSA's wet dream. There it is again. As a research director at SCL's elections division, Wiley had few illusions about the kind of work his firm did. Chatting with a friend in late 2013, he readily volunteered that the company aided coups and handled government dirty work, alluding to work in Trinidad and Tobago. In that country, Wiley claimed to have data that was so granular that he could tell what kind of pornographic video a user was watching. This one user was watching... You'll love this one. All right. Well, he was watching a very particular type of pornographic video involving fruit, plantains, and then started looking up plantain recipes, he claimed. Haha, that is very funny. moving along, we might be building a predictive crime data system in Trinidad, Wiley told one person later in 2014. Not going after the porn guys, I guess, or maybe they are. Maybe that was the basis of it. Okay, good. Either that or the Plantain Council. Anyway, Wiley told one person in 2014, comparing it to the Tom Cruise movie Minority Report, not the Plantains, the predictive crime system. I don't think that was in Minority Report, but anyway, his lawyer declined to answer specific questions about her client's work in the country, and things are getting kind of crazy there, so might as well move on to the next topic. In late 2013, Wiley, as an SCL employee, met then Breitbart News leader Steve Bannon, who also had a plantain probably on hand, who in turn introduced him to hedge fund magnate Robert Mercer, and who knows what fruit he likes. In Mercer and his daughter Rebecca, never mind, Wiley saw potentially powerful backers, ones that might even fund his own startup. To one person, he mentioned the possibility of the Mercers becoming his first client if he were ever able to separate himself from SCL and start his own venture. But that was tricky. He had a contract with SCL, and Mercer was already paying his employer. Mercer did not respond to a request for comment. A source familiar with the matter said that the relationship was purely between Mercer and Cambridge Analytica, and that there was no arrangement between Renaissance Technologies, the hedge fund Mercer ran until last year, and the data firm. Not that you really should bother separating the two of them, but okay. Late 2013 communications from Wiley, seen by BuzzFeed News, however, refer to an investment from Renaissance as being, quote, on track. Wiley's attorney told BuzzFeed News her client does not recall speaking to any of the funders of CA about this. Wiley seemed unfazed by any potential legal tie-ups that came with his SCL employment. Instead, he soldiered on, bragging to friends about gaining access to a set of unknown Facebook data that would significantly bolster his research. Everything is 150% above board and legal and ethical, Wiley explained in early 2014. That doesn't sound like what he thinks of it now, does it? It's not clear just what kind of Facebook information Wiley was discussing here, or why he would have, I guess, felt that he had to defend it in such flamboyant style. It's unusual. Through his attorney, he insisted his startup had no assets or data. But given the news of the past week, it may well have been a nod to the information collected by Alexander Kogan, the Cambridge University data scientist who's been accused of handing over some 50 million Facebook profiles to third parties in violation of Facebook's terms of service. Now a key figure in the firestorm surrounding Cambridge Analytica, Kogan has claimed he was unaware of how SCL and Cambridge Analytica was using his data. We have a responsibility to protect your data, and if we can't, then we don't deserve to serve you, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg said in a statement Wednesday about Cambridge Analytica. I've been working to understand exactly what happened and how to make sure this doesn't happen again. Wiley's presentation for arg.us did not mention what kind of data it had access to, but it did tout that his small team had experience with the UK and Canadian governments, the Obama 2008 campaign, and secretive Silicon Valley data analysis company Palantir Technologies. I do feel like we've heard about that one before. Not certain exactly where, but, there's a linked article here about it, also in BuzzFeed News, if you'd like to check into it and see if it rings bells for you. The deck also mentioned that employees at the startup in their previous lines of work, quote, had secured $15 million in project finance from a major U.S. hedge fund, likely referring to Mercer, and said the company was hoping to raise $15 million to $20 million for up to a 20% equity stake. The American consumer market has never been more fragmented, when read one slide. Another showed the company's first line of business was an estimated $5.2 billion opportunity in politics, complete with the logos of the GOP elephant and Democratic donkey. Wiley pitched his company, which he co-founded with SCL colleagues Tadas Jusikas, I'm guessing at that pronunciation, a data scientist, and Brent Clickard, a psychologist. I wish he had been the data scientist with the click in his name. Anyway, he pitched his company to several Silicon Valley and European venture capitalists in 2014, eventually changing its name from arg.us to Eunoia Technologies. Eunoia. My best guess at that, Eunoia. I don't know. UK incorporation documents show that Eunoia, Greek, that'll help. Greek for beautiful thinking. So the Greeks are mad at my pronunciation. Now I know. Anyway, it was later registered in May of 2015 to an individual named Mark Gettelson. According to a source, Gettelson, who did not return a request for comment, ran marketing for the company. Allen said that arg.us was, quote, never a serious pitch, and called Eunoia, the Greeks aren't listening, a personal service company that had no data or assets. We'll see about that. Wiley's brief stint trying to launch a startup was largely defined by his quest to fund his endeavor, and based on documents, he appeared to have been largely agnostic about where that funding would come from. Around the time he started thinking about starting the company, he was already discussing with friends his close connections to wealthy Russians. I knew it. How could you not be involved with wealthy Russians? In one correspondence, he said he was worried about taking their money because they lacked technological expertise, but found the idea of working for a crazy evil Russian quite intriguing. That's backwards from where you're supposed to be on this. Recently, Wiley has seemingly had a change of heart. In public interviews since identifying himself last week, he criticized Kogan, who he said flew back and forth between Russia and did research at a St. Petersburg university. Wiley also spoke about Cambridge Analytica's contact with Russia's second-largest oil company, Lukoil, over some questionable project proposals. One San Francisco-based investor who spoke to Wiley about his startup in January of 2014 but declined to invest showed BuzzFeed News an email that he received about the startup. That note claimed Wiley's technology had been tested on political clients and could profile someone's real-world personality and motivations based on what they did online. Jucikas, Jucikas, remember the partner he went in with, also Wiley's former roommate, and Clickard, who have since gone on to create their own company together, said in an email to BuzzFeed News that it is factually incorrect to suggest that Jucikas and Clickard had planned to leave SCL's elections division to start their own company in 2014, not least because Jucikas' employment contract involved restrictive covenants for work in similar areas. A slide from arg.us's 2014 pitch deck features photos of Jucikas and Clickard as well as Wiley. A handful of 2014 emails, drafts of business cards and stationery, and an audio recording reviewed by BuzzFeed News suggest Jucikas was heavily involved in Eunoia's planning and development. Oops. One source, who attended the same Victoria, British Columbia high school as Wiley and ended up doing graphic design work for Eunoia in 2014 and 15, recalled meeting with Wiley and Jucikas on several occasions. At one dinner meeting in London, Jucikas brought out his computer to show a rough mock-up of what he, Wiley, and Clickard had been building. According to the source, it showed a map of the U.S. with pinpoints that, when clicked, would surface personal data on an individual, including location, political leanings, and age. The source was unclear where the data that fed that tool came from. What really surprised me with all this is how nonchalant they were about this, the source said, noting that Eunoia's founders spoke openly about their political and elections work. It was like, hey, we have a whole bunch of data on a whole bunch of people and we don't have any problem showing you. What are the ethical questions about this? Good question. Wiley's pitch deck for arg.us and documents for Eunoia never mentioned what kind of specific data sets Wiley and his team had access to, and his lawyer told BuzzFeed News that the former was never a real company, while the latter had no data. But conversations Wiley had with people in 2014 showed that he spoke freely about what kind of data he could tap into while at SCL. In one conversation with a source, he said he was pulling favors with friends at Facebook to get data. Later that year, Wiley claimed that he had a data set that had consumer data records matched to 10 million Facebook profiles and 45 million LinkedIn profiles. We haven't really touched on LinkedIn at this point. Okay. Thanks for bringing it up. Whatever information Wiley had access to, his hope was to create the world's largest information database on people. In theory, we could change the world in a positive way, he wrote in one correspondence. We would create one of the world's largest population data sets that could massively revolutionize all kinds of scientific research. Wiley, who left SCL and Cambridge in the summer of 2014, also bragged to associates about meetings he had had with potential corporate clients, including Walmart, yay, Monsanto, woohoo, the American Petroleum Institute, Burberry, that's not so bad, DKNY, Ford, and Virgin, a little bit of the fashion in there, right? Wiley even claimed he'd been invited to a meeting with the Department of Defense's Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA, very likely. Another document obtained by BuzzFeed News details Unoia's micro-targeting products, many of them explicitly tailored for use in elections. Standard practice in political campaigns currently targets demographic factors such as gender, age, region, and ethnic background. It reads, however, we feel that demographics are too superficial because true diversity goes beyond what we look like. We don't believe in hyphenated America. A little bit of Bannon influence there. The document goes on to list a dozen products and services, among them psychographic micro-targeting, also addressable TV micro-targeting, multi-agent system voter behavior simulation, and message testing and development. Ken Strasma, a former Obama campaign staffer, confirmed in an interview with BuzzFeed News that he had been advising Wiley and Unoia, don't do that, noting that he thought Wiley's idea was mainly going to be applied to, quote, predictive analysis for fashion. Their focus was on psychographics, but I don't think that they got to a point where they actually identified data assets, he said, adding that he did not think they were using any Facebook data sets. I know they talked about with us about how to get access to voter data, and I know they had talked about the concept of using Facebook apps to collect data. There were discussions about politics, and some other ex-CA staff wanted to continue working in Republican politics, Wiley's lawyer, Allen, said. However, they parted ways with Mr. Wiley to set up their own company that does work for Republican clients. Mr. Wiley has not worked for Republicans since leaving CA and does not wish to in the future. Well, that's very nice. Glad to hear that. Unoia never got off the ground, as its founders had different views about how the company should be run, according to Allen. The unnamed graphic designer who did work for the startup said that Wiley and its other co-founders slowly stopped responding to his requests in 2015, noting that it's possible it never launched because of the data scientists' past relationships or contractual obligations with SCL. After several years in dormancy, Unoia was formally dissolved in October 2017, according to UK business records. While a source called arg.us/Unoia, a precursor to Cambridge Analytica, Allen maintained that they were completely separate entities and that her client eventually left his position because of a toxic work environment. Mr. Wiley has not worked for any CA clients, Republicans, or alt-right projects since leaving CA, she said in an email. Before and after he left SCL and Cambridge Analytica in late June 2014, Wiley seemed to have few qualms about the Republican Party in messages viewed by BuzzFeed News. In one, he mentioned how hipster, liberal, vegetarian, European gays are taking over the Republican Party. Really? Oh, okay. Another, sent following the U.S. midterm elections in 2014, included a link to an article about Republicans winning 8 out of 9 key Senate races, alluding to the idea that SCL and Cambridge Analytica had helped these clients. Still, Wiley wasn't wedded to working for one party or ideology. According to one source, he claimed he was in conversations with Hillary Clinton's campaign and held out hope that she would possibly hire his startup. That never happened. On Tuesday at the Frontline Club, Wiley was praised for coming forward with the information and revealing to the world what he had done. One crowd member, however, didn't seem too pleased. recalling whistleblowers like Daniel Ellsberg, Edward Snowden, and Chelsea Manning, who risked imprisonment and severe punishment for coming forward with important confidential information. She asked a question that seemed to bury deep into Wiley's soul. You came from the dark side. How are you going to redeem yourself? Wiley tried to answer the question before pausing, gathering his thoughts, and trying again. I'm not saying that I am doing good for the world yet, he said. I'm saying I'm taking the first step to own up to something that I had a really fundamental role on. I'm trying to accept responsibility. And that is the end of that sort of counter-narrative on Wiley. It didn't really upset things entirely, but it does cast some doubt on the thoroughness with which he's turned over a new leaf, or was he really reluctant in the beginning? And it may not be the case that he was always reluctant. Okay, well, let's see. I have much more, of course, on Cambridge Analytica, much more to add to the picture. Let's turn next to the Mother Jones piece, Cloak and Data, the real story behind Cambridge Analytica's rise and fall. Finally, the real story. I've been waiting for that. The secretive data firm said it could move the minds of American voters. That wasn't its real victory. Andy Kroll's piece for the May-June 2018 issue of Mother Jones. Does anybody really stick by those issues anymore? I don't know. All right. What do we got here? Divided into different sections, numbered at that. 1 here, right up at the top. I can't stand lying to you every day. In the summer of 2015, Chris Wilson, the Director of Research, Analytics, and Digital Strategy for Senator Ted Cruz's presidential campaign, had a conversation with a contractor that left him furious. A widely respected pollster who had taken leave from his firm to work full-time for Cruz. Wilson oversaw a team of more than 40 data scientists, developers, and digital marketers. One of the largest departments inside Cruz's Houston-based operation. The Iowa caucuses were fast approaching, and the Cruz campaign had poured nearly $13 million into winning, the opening contest of the primary season. As the campaign laid the groundwork for Iowa, a sizable chunk of its spending, $4.4 million and counting, flowed to a secretive company, oh my goodness, you'll never guess, with British roots named, Cambridge Analytica. A relative newcomer to American politics, the firm sold itself as the latest, greatest entrant into the burgeoning field of political technology. It claimed to possess detailed profiles on 230 million American voters based on up to 5,000 data points. Everything from where you live to whether you own a car, your shopping habits and voting record, the medications you take, your religious affiliation, and the TV shows you watch. This data is available to anyone with deep pockets, but Cambridge professed to bring a unique approach to the micro-targeting techniques that have become de rigueur in politics. It promised to couple consumer information with psychological data harvested from the social media platforms and its own in-house survey research. To group voters by personality type, pegging them as agreeable or neurotic, confrontational or conciliatory, leaders or followers. It would then target these groups with specifically tailored images and messages delivered via Facebook ads, glossy mailers, or in-person interactions. The company's CEO, a polo-playing Eton graduate named Alexander Nix, called it our secret sauce. Oh, I've heard Armando use that term before, but I think he was talking, maybe it is sort of the same thing. As a rule, Nix said his firm generally steered clear of working in British politics. Why? Well, to avoid controversy in its own backyard. But it had no qualms applying its mind-bending techniques to a foreign electorate. It's someone else's political system, explains one former Cambridge employee, a British citizen. It's not ours. None of us would ever consider doing what we were doing here. Well, I'll be darned. That's awfully nice of you. Unbelievable. Thanks a lot, you jerks. Brought to Cruz by two of the campaign's biggest backers, hedge fund billionaire Robert Mercer and his daughter Rebecca, Cambridge Analytica was put in charge of the entire data and digital operation, embedding 12 of its employees in Houston. The company, largely owned by Robert Mercer, said it had something special for Cruz. According to marketing materials obtained by Mother Jones, it pitched a revolutionary piece of software called Ripon, an all-in-one tool that let a campaign manage its voter database, etc. We'll tell you more about it after this. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. When we last left off, we were telling you about the revolutionary piece of software Cambridge Analytica was telling the Cruz campaign they had access to called Ripon, R-I-P-O-N, an all-in-one tool, as we were saying, that let the campaign manage its voter database, micro-targeting efforts, door-to-door canvassing, low-dollar fundraising, and surveys. Ripon, Cambridge vowed, was the future of campaigning. The name is a clever bit of marketing. Ripon, it's a small town in Wisconsin where the Republican Party was born. Oh, I didn't even know that. Probably means I'm mispronouncing it. And that it's Ripon. Sorry, Wisconsin. The Cruz campaign believed Ripon might give it an edge in a crowded field of Republican hopefuls. But the software wasn't ready right away. According to former Cruz staffers, Wilson inquired about Ripon's status daily. It was almost finished, he was repeatedly told. Sounds like Trump is already running the show. 2 weeks. Soon. It's coming. Weeks passed, then months. Finally, in August of 2015, one of the Cambridge consultants in Houston came clean. Ripon doesn't exist, he told Wilson, according to several former Cruz staffers. It'll never exist. I've just resigned because I can't stand lying to you every day anymore. Holy moly. The campaign had hired Cambridge in the belief it could use Ripon to help win Cruz the nomination. Instead, it was paying millions of dollars to build the Ripon technology. It was like an internal Ponzi scheme, a former Cruz campaign official told me. The Cruz campaign couldn't fire Cambridge outright. The Mercers wouldn't be happy, and the campaign was too far along to axe a significant part of its digital staff. Still, Cruz officials steadily reduced Cambridge's role. Even though the campaign used Cambridge's psychological data in Iowa, Cruz's victory there in February of 2016 did nothing to quell the growing distrust campaign officials felt toward the company. The Cruz team wasn't alone in its doubts about the firm. Cambridge was also working, albeit in a more limited role, for rival Ben Carson's campaign, whose experience with the company was similarly frustrating. Cambridge, for instance, sold itself as an expert in TV advertising, yet failed to grasp basic facts about buying ads. Carson staffers came away feeling like Cambridge was, at best, in over its head and, at worst, a sham. After Carson and Cruz dropped out and Trump all but clinched the nomination, Doug Watts, a senior staffer on the Carson campaign, got a call from Paul Manafort. "What do you know about Cambridge Analytica?" Manafort asked. Watts replied that he didn't think much of the firm. "They're just full of crap," the S word, of course, being used here. "Right?" Manafort said, according to Watts. "I don't want him anywhere near the campaign." This must be hilarious then, and in hindsight, except for all the fact that all these people are under indictment or having to answer all sorts of uncomfortable questions, maybe going to jail, maybe they pled guilty already. But the idea that like Cambridge Analytica was at the heart of all this stuff, and does this call it all into question? We'll see. But I mean, some people who are Republicans and Trump supporters at this point, I guess, are, I'm certain, saying Cambridge Analytica wasn't the heart of any kind of mastermind conspiracy theory. They sucked. They were worse. We fired them, or we would have fired them if we would have been allowed to. On the other hand, I guess the question remains, well, did they save, were they poor performers for campaigns too traditional to allow them to simply, cheat and collude with Russians and, hire Ukrainian sex workers to entrap other people or whatever it was that they said that they would do on those undercover videos? And it wasn't until they got into the Trump campaign that they had free reign to do whatever they wanted. Did things change there? I don't know. I haven't read this article yet. Let's continue and find out. I'm so excited. A few months later, on September 19th, 2016, Alexander Nix strode on stage at the Concordia Annual Summit in Manhattan, a highbrow TED meets Davos confab. He was a featured speaker alongside Madeleine Albright, Warren Buffett, David Petraeus, what is he doing there? And New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. Wired magazine had recently named him one of its 25 geniuses who are creating the future of business. In a dark tailored suit and designer glasses, wearing a signet ring on his left pinky, Nix regaled the audience with the story of how Cambridge Analytica had turned Ted Cruz from an obscure and reviled U.S. senator, that part is true, into the only credible threat to the phenomenon Donald Trump. Using Cambridge's methods, the Cruz campaign had sliced and diced Iowa caucus goers into hyper-specific groups based on their personality traits and the issues they cared about, such as the Second Amendment. As Nix clicked through his slides, he showed how it was possible to use so-called psychographics, a fancy term for measuring attitudes and interests of individuals, to narrow the universe of Iowans from the tens of thousands down to a single persuadable voter. In this case, Nix's slide listed a man named Jeffrey J. Ruest, R-U-E-S-T, a registered Republican born in 1963. He was very low in neuroticism, quite low in openness, and slightly conscientious. That's a weird way of describing someone. I know it's the scale, of course, but it's just sounds so odd when they do this. Okay. Anyway, he would likely be receptive to a gun rights message. Clearly, the Cruz campaign is over now, he said as he finished his presentation. But what I can tell you is that of the two candidates left in this election, one of them is using these technologies, and it's going to be very interesting to see how they impact the next 7 weeks. That candidate, of course, Donald Trump. After Cruz dropped out in May of 2016, the Mercers had quickly shifted their alliance to Trump, and his campaign hired their data firm over Manafort's apparent objections. Obviously, he didn't bargain for Rebecca Mercer being their big advocate, Watts says, so I presume he just capitulated. Soon, Trump jettisoned Manafort and installed in his place the Mercers' political Svengali, Steve Bannon, who was, of course, also a board member, vice president, and part owner of Cambridge Analytica. Come November 9th, 2016, Cambridge wasted no time touting itself as a visionary that had seen Trump's path to the White House when no one else did. Nix took an international victory lap to drum up new political business in Australia, India, Brazil, and Germany. Another Cambridge director gushed that the firm was receiving so much client interest that it's like drinking from a fire hose. Actually, the 2016 election was the high watermark for Cambridge Analytica. Since then, the firm has all but vanished from the U.S. political scene. According to Nix, this was by design. I totally meant it. Late last year, he said his company had ceased pursuing new U.S. political business, but recently an extraordinary series of developments unfolded that led to Nix's suspension as CEO and left the company's future uncertain. A whistleblower went public with allegations, you heard all about him, since cited in class action lawsuits that the company had used unethical methods to obtain a massive trove of Facebook data to fuel its psychographic tactics. We exploited Facebook to harvest millions of people's profiles and build models to exploit what we knew about them and target their inner demons, Chris Wiley, who helped launch the company, told the British Observer. That was the basis the entire company was built on. Next came the release of an undercover investigation by the UK's Channel 4, which captured video of Nix and other Cambridge executives explaining how they could covertly inject propaganda, quote, into the bloodstream of the internet, unquote. They also described how their services could include bribing a politician and recording undercover video or sending very beautiful Ukrainian girls to entrap a candidate. The fallout was swift. Facebook, already under fire for facilitating the spread of disinformation, suspended Cambridge from its platform. British officials sought a warrant to search the company's office. Lawmakers on both sides of the Atlantic demanded answers. They should be barred from any U.S. election or government work until a full investigation can be concluded. Representative Joaquin Castro of Texas, a member of the House Intelligence Committee, tweeted, "The story of Cambridge Analytica's rise and its rapid fall in some ways parallels the ascendancy of the candidate it claims to have helped elevate to the presidency. It reached the apex of American politics through a mix of bluffing, luck, failing upward, and, yes, psychological manipulation. Sound familiar? Like Trump, Nix was a master of hype who peddled a story that people wanted to believe. Take Jeffrey Ruist, the voter Nix identified at the Concordia Summit, down to the latitude and longitude of his home to illustrate the firm's psychographic prowess in Iowa. The message was that Cambridge had the ability to peer into the minds of and to persuade voters of the most granular level. Ruist wouldn't have been useful to Cruz or any of his GOP rivals in Iowa, though he lives 1,000 miles away in North Carolina. But why let inconvenient details interfere with the perfect pitch? Wow, that's weird. Section 2 here, we called him Mr. Bond. We used the same techniques as Aristotle and Hitler. That's okay. The consultant said, "We appealed to people on an emotional level to get them to agree on a functional level." The year was 1992. The consultant was Nigel Oakes, a former Monte Carlo TV producer and ad man for Saatchi & Saatchi, and he was speaking to the trade magazine Marketing. Oakes was then running the Behavioral Dynamics Institute, a research facility for understanding group behavior and for harnessing the power of psychology to craft messages that change hearts and minds. But in reality, Oakes' institute was a stalking horse for the company he would launch the year after the interview, Strategic Communications Laboratories, SCL, public affairs company that would later spawn Cambridge Analytica, began small, applying its behavioral science-minded approach to public influence campaigns in the UK, including one that it boasts rescued Lloyd's of London by convincing Britons to invest another $1.5 billion in the ailing insurance market, but SCL soon branched into politics. Oakes said he advised Nelson Mandela's African National Congress on how to prevent violence during the 1994 elections, that sounds much better than the other things, as well as politicians in Asia, South America, and Europe. In 2000, the government of Indonesian President, oh my goodness. Does anybody remember who was president of Indonesia in 2000? I see the name here, but why don't I just say it was Al Jones? It wasn't. It was Abdurrahman Wahid. That wasn't so bad. Who was struggling to contain the violence and upheaval in his country. He hired Oakes to burnish his image, which involved building an elaborate media command center in Jakarta for monitoring and shaping public sentiment. We called him Mr. Bond because he is English. That's so racist. You got to stop it. One of Oakes' Indonesian employees told The Independent, and because he is such a mystery. Okay then. In 2005, SCL expanded into military and defense, pitching the use of psychological operations and soft power in the war on terror. The firm began picking up major clients, including the Pentagon and the UK Ministry of Defense, advising them on which Afghan leaders to target with counterinsurgency messages or how to dissuade teenage boys from joining Al-Qaeda. The company, meanwhile, hired Nix, a former financial analyst, to grow its non-defense business. Former colleagues say he was just the man for the job. Nix the salesman is an artist, to be honest, one told me. Another referred to him as a chancer, the British term for a consummate opportunist. He'll always be like, "Can I give it a go?" the colleague said. "Can I sell this to you and work out the details afterward?" That does sound familiar. Nix had an eye on the United States, where the courts were stripping away restrictions on political spending and empowering a new class of individual megadonors. He traveled here in 2010 to get the lay of the land, but came away discouraged. Political consultants picked sides in America, he learned. A British outfit that worked for both left and right-of-center clients might struggle to break into the market. Then, on Election Day in November 2012, Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney watched as his campaign's voter turnout app, codenamed Project Orca, you remember that one, crashed. It was humiliating, but indicative of a larger dynamic. Democrats powered by President Barack Obama's 2008 and 2012 runs, had gained a huge advantage over their Republican counterparts in the realms of data and technology. The GOP's 2012 post-mortem report called for a cultural shift inside the party to embrace new tools and methodologies to win. It also said dump the racism, but they didn't like that part. That didn't come in a box, and this did. Well, we have to be the party that is open and ready to rebuild our entire playbook, it read, and we must take advice from outside our comfort zone. Nix saw his opening. SCL had recently rebranded itself as an expert in data analytics, the sifting and distilling of vast amounts of information from different sources into actionable outcomes. That skill set, combined with SCL's previous work in microtargeting and PSYOPs, made it an ideal candidate to find an audience in the world of Republican politics. The Republicans had been left behind, Nix later said. By the time Romney lost in 2012, there was a vacuum, and so that was the commercial opportunity. Nix was soon introduced to Chris Wiley, then a 20-something Canadian technologist. Wiley had worked under Obama's director of targeting and consulted for Canada's Liberal Party. Nix hired him and put him to work building a company that could attract clients in the hyper-competitive U.S. political market. Wiley, for his part, had an idea about how his new employer, SCL, might gain an edge. In 2007, David Stilwell, then a PhD student in psychology, stumbled onto a digital gold mine. He'd always wondered about his personality and how he would score in the 5-factor model, a personality test that measures openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Known, of course, as OCEAN, this model is widely used by psychologists, but one challenge they encountered when applying it to different areas, marketing, relationships, politics, was gathering sufficient data. People naturally hesitate to give personal information about their fears, desires, and motivations. Stillwell knew a little code, so he pulled certain Big 5 questionnaires off the internet, stuck them in a quiz format, and uploaded an app to Facebook called My Personality. It quickly went viral. Millions of people took the quiz, and with their permission, Stillwell went on to accumulate data on personality traits and Facebook habits for 4 million of them. Using this data, Stillwell, now working at the University of Cambridge's Psychometrics Center, and 2 other researchers published a paper in 2013 in which they showed how you could predict an individual's skin color or sexuality based on her Facebook likes. They found a correlation between likes of thunderstorms, the Colbert Report, and curly fries with high intelligence, while users who liked the Hello Kitty brand tended to be high on openness and lower on conscientiousness, agreeableness, and emotional stability. Probably could have predicted some of that. Stillwell told me that as an afterthought, he and his co-authors threw in some language at the end about the commercial possibilities of their findings. The paper attracted the attention of the companies looking to leverage Facebook and other social media data for their own purposes, and one person who took a keen interest was SCL's Chris Wiley. According to emails obtained by Mother Jones, Wiley approached Stillwell and a colleague via a fellow faculty member, a young Russian-American professor named Alexander Kogan, hoping to cut a deal in which the firm would get access to Stillwell's data. Stillwell hadn't heard of SCL, but he agreed to a meeting. When dates were circulated between the Cambridge academics and the SCL representatives, the title wasn't subtle: Panopticon Meeting. Panopticon, of course, refers to a prison or building constructed so that all parts of it are visible by a single watchman, but the surveilled can't see who's viewing them. In the end, Stillwell decided not to partner with SCL. Undeterred, I think we actually know this part of the story, SCL instead hired Kogan, who went on to create his own Facebook app, This Is Your Digital Life. As detailed in a class action lawsuit against Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, the app, which purported to be for academic research, not only collected personality data on the 270,000 people who took the quiz, but also let Kogan vacuum up Facebook user data on all their friends. The Washington Post reported in late March that Facebook separately provided Kogan with data on 57 billion friendships as part of his work with 2 of the company's data scientists between 2013 and 2015. Around the same time he was mining Facebook data, Kogan also forged a relationship with St. Petersburg University, which hired him as an associate professor and provided him with research funding. He denies this research had any connection to his work for SCL. According to Wiley, Kogan acquired more than 50 million profiles. He says Kogan then passed that data to SCL in apparent violation of Facebook's terms of use in order to build its psychographic profiling methods. Everyone knew we were wading into a gray area, Wiley later said. I don't feel like he said that. It was an instance of if you don't ask questions, you won't get an answer you don't like. That I believe we felt. Kogan denies any wrongdoing. My view is that I'm being basically used as a scapegoat. Nix now had his calling card. SCL would break into the $10 billion American political market by pitching itself as a cutting-edge consultancy using behavioral micro-targeting. That is, influencing voters based not on their demographics, but on their personalities, as sophisticated data modeling to win elections. His timing couldn't have been better. Section 3, marketing materials aren't given under oath. That sounds pretty key. One day in 2013, a knockabout Republican political consultant named Mark Block and his colleague boarded a flight from Los Angeles to New York. As the plane took off, they got to talking with the man seated next to them, an ex-military officer who mentioned he worked as a subcontractor for a company seeking U.S. political clients. They do cyber warfare for elections, the subcontractor said. Block dozed off as his colleague and her seatmate continued to chat. When they landed, his colleague told him excitedly that they needed to talk to a guy named Alexander Nix. Not long after, they met with Nix in a conference room at the Willard Intercontinental Hotel, a stone's throw from the White House. The meeting lasted more than 6 hours, Block recalls, as Nix described how they could use personality data and psychographics in American campaigns. By the time he was done, I'm going like, holy crap, but not crap. Block told me, I had been aware of what Obama had done, but this seemed to be light years ahead. No talk of Ukrainian girls or anything, huh? At a subsequent meeting Block attended, Nix was introduced to Rebecca Mercer, who was quickly becoming one of the biggest donors in Republican politics. Becca, as she's known to her friends, is the middle daughter of Robert Mercer. You know all about him. Becca is the political animal of the Mercer family, and in the late 2000s and early 2010s, she plowed $35 million from her family foundation into conservative groups such as the Heritage Foundation, Federalist Society, and the Heartland Institute. The Mercers also invested a reported $10 million in Breitbart News in 2011. They've donated millions to Republican candidates and super PACs, from Mitt Romney and Herman Cain to a congressional candidate in Oregon named Arthur Robinson, who caught Robert Mercer's attention with a pseudoscientific newsletter in which he argued that small amounts of nuclear radiation have health benefits. Yeah, okay. There's a chart here of many of the people to whom they had donated money along the way. The Mercers had attended the semi-annual donor retreats organized by the Koch brothers and had, according to a source familiar with their political work, invested in the Koch's data venture, Themis, or maybe Themis, depending. It's named for the Greek goddess of wisdom and order. Stop doing that to the poor Greeks. Which was supposed to close the gap with Democrats in the data arms race. But after Romney's loss in 2012, the Mercers were fed up. Becca Mercer turned heads at a 2012 post-mortem event at the University Club in Manhattan when she excoriated the Romney campaign for its lackluster data operation. According to people familiar with the Mercers' thinking, Becca and her father set out to find their own data geniuses. Over lunch in Manhattan, Becca listened intently as Nix gave his pitch. When he finished, she said, I want you to tell this to my dad. She gave him an address with instructions to meet later that day. At the appointed time, Nix and Block arrived at a grungy sports bar on the Hudson River north of the city. We're going like, what the F, Block says. Becca texted to say she and her father would soon arrive. Moments later, Sea Owl, the Mercer family's 203-foot super yacht, pulled up to the dock behind the sports bar. Ah, okay. Aboard the yacht, Nix took a seat next to Robert Mercer, opened his Mac, and launched into his spiel again. Becca sat next to her father on the couch. Behind them stood Steve Bannon, the investment banker turned Hollywood producer and conservative activist who took over Breitbart News after the death of Andrew Breitbart. Whatever Nix told the Mercers that day in 2013, it worked. They agreed to invest a reported $15 million in a new company that would be the face of SCL's American political work. You know what that is. Bannon was given a seat on the board and a stake in the new company to help, as Nix later said, the firm navigate the U.S. political scene. Nix installed himself in Mercer World, presenting himself as Becca Mercer's political guru and taking meetings at the Breitbart Embassy, the Capitol Hill row house that served as the conservative website's offices and Bannon's crash pad. We're starting to make more connections here. The company was incorporated in Delaware in December 31st, 2013. The name was a mix of old and new, Cambridge Analytica. But if the Mercers had paid closer attention to a test run of Nix's venture in 2013 Virginia governor's race, they might have reconsidered going into business with SCL. A PAC, the Middle Resolution, had paid Nix's company several $100,000 that year for a list of persuadable voters to help elect Republican Ken Cuccinelli, who was running for governor. Months passed, the list never arrived. When the group's founder, Bob Bailey, demanded the list, Nix asked for more money, and Bailey cut bait. Another Virginia-based group, Americans for Limited Government, then paid SCL $100,000 to create a list of suburban female voters who traditionally supported Democrats but might be swayed to vote for Cuccinelli if shown the right message. Late in the race, the group's canvassers took Nix's list into the field and returned with a perplexing result. The people on it were already Cuccinelli supporters. The higher-ups at Americans for Limited Government asked another firm to analyze the list, and it turned out SCL had handed them a roster of die-hard Republicans. Well, that doesn't look too good for those guys. Despite these early missteps, Cambridge Analytica quickly signed on a new host of new clients thanks to the Mercers, who leveraged their position as mega donors to effectively strong-arm politicians into using their new firm. Just like I told you. It was the Mercers that made people work with us, an early Cambridge employee told me, the reporter at Mother Jones, not me. Cambridge boasted 8 clients at the federal level in 2013 and 14, and members of the Mercer family have supplied financial backing to each of them, including to 5 during that election cycle. One was former Ambassador John Bolton's Super PAC. Yeah, I remember that guy. A potential vehicle for a presidential run. During the 2014 midterms, Robert Mercer gave $1 million to the group, which soon paid Cambridge more than $340,000 to develop Cambridge's personality-based targeting on the issue of national security. It was an odd arrangement. Recipients of Mercer money would turn around and pay a vendor partly owned by the Mercers. Rebecca Mercer did not respond to requests for comment. Very interesting that they seem to have stumbled upon the same thing that we did. Well, there isn't a great deal of time left to get through the bulk of the rest of this article. I recommend that you read it. We'll talk more about the things that are revealed in it. Let me give you an idea of what the subject headings of the other sections are. I'll give you an idea where this story goes. We were in Section 3. Section 4 is they've gotten the wool pulled over their eyes. Section 5 continues below the phenomenon Donald Trump. And then finally, down here, Section 6, I am aware of how this looks. That really is pretty amazing. The last paragraph really is, it reflects the paragraph that I just read in an interesting way and hints at what might be yet to come in the Cambridge Analytica inquiry. Let me roll our outro music, though, and get ready to take off for the day. By most accounts, Cambridge Analytica's main feat of political persuasion, it reads, was convincing a group of Republican donors, candidates, and organizations to hand over millions of dollars. A company called Emerdata, E-M-E-R-D-A-T-A, that lists Nix as a director, recently added Rebecca Mercer and another Mercer daughter to its board, suggesting that Nix hasn't fallen out with all of his GOP patrons. But Cambridge's controversial foray into U.S. politics spawned larger questions about how our social media habits can be turned against us, and how companies such as Facebook hold more power over our lives, the ability to shape public conversation, even political outcomes, than many people are comfortable with. Whether or not Cambridge Analytica survives, data about our personality types, our predilections, our hopes and fears, information we unwittingly divulge via status updates, tweets, likes, and photos will increasingly be used to target us as voters and consumers, for good and ill, and often without our knowledge. These tactics will facilitate the spread of fake news and disinformation and make it easier for foreign interests to intervene in our elections, whether they are Russian trolls or British chancers, or hell, both. Who knows? Who could be doing this? We'll be back with a wrap-up of the day after this.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
A wrap-up today. A wrap of 2 days, really. We tried to get caught up on all of the Cambridge Analytica material. We still couldn't do it. There's a lot out there. A lot of it overlaps. We're slowly beginning to unravel this thing. Who knows where we'll be tomorrow, Wednesday, when we return to the air live.